John Deere didn't just dominate the tractor market, it crushed every challenger that dared to stand in its way. From bold American rivals to ambitious European imports, dozens of tractors were built to dethrone the green giant. They promised more horsepower, better technology, and even futuristic designs, but one by one they all failed. Today, we're uncovering 10 tractors that tried to replace John Deere but ended up as forgotten failures. Some were powerful, some were innovative, and some were downright bizarre, but none could break the Deere dynasty. Stick around, because the last one on this list might just shock you the most. Number 1. International Harvester 2+2 Series, 1979 to 1985. When International Harvester unveiled the 2+2 series, they believed it would be the breakthrough to finally outshine John Deere in the high horsepower market. These tractors, introduced in 1979 with models like the 3388, 3588, and later the 6788, were unlike anything farmers had seen before. The Snoopy nose design featured a long front hood and an articulated front half that turned while the rear half remained rigid. IH marketed them as the world's first row crop 4WD tractors, aiming to combine the maneuverability of a row crop tractor with the pulling power of an articulated machine. On paper, the concept was brilliant. The tractors had horsepower ratings from 130 up to 186, ran on reliable IH 6-cylinder diesel engines, and were designed to handle large implements with superior traction. Farmers, at first, were intrigued by the radical design and promises of versatility. But in reality, the 2+2s had serious flaws. The articulation system made them awkward in tight spaces, the long wheelbase was difficult for row work, and weight distribution issues led to traction losses compared to true 4WD machines. Reliability problems with transmissions and hydraulic systems further eroded trust. Farmers who were loyal to John Deere's tried-and-true 40 series row crops saw little reason to gamble on an experimental design. The 2+2 series sold in modest numbers, but it never dethroned Deere. Today, they're remembered as bold but flawed tractors that showcased IH's desperation during a time of financial crisis. Number 2. Allis-Chalmers 440, 1970 to 1976. By the early 1970s, the market for high-horsepower articulated 4WD tractors was heating up, and Allis-Chalmers wanted in. Their solution was the 440, introduced in 1972. But unlike John Deere, which invested heavily in its in-house 7020 and 7520 4WD models, Allis-Chalmers cut costs by rebadging a tractor built by Steiger. The 440 used a massive 12.5-liter Cummins V8 diesel producing around 200 horsepower, paired with an Eaton manual transmission. It had impressive pulling power and was marketed as a competitor to Deere's 4WD lineup. The problem was that the 440 wasn't truly an Allis-Chalmers product. Farmers quickly realized it was essentially a green-painted Steiger Cougar with minor cosmetic changes. This lack of originality hurt its credibility with loyal Allis customers. On top of that, parts and service support lagged compared to John Deere, which had a vast dealer network ready to back up their machines. The 440 also had reliability complaints, particularly with its transmission and hydraulics, which were not as refined as Deere's offerings. Sales of the Allis 440 were underwhelming, and by 1976, it was quietly discontinued. Farmers who needed serious 4WD power usually went straight to Deere, Versatile, or Steiger itself. The 440 remains a symbol of Allis-Chalmers' struggle in the 1970s to keep up with Deere by borrowing ideas rather than leading innovation. It tried to take on John Deere head-to-head, but its borrowed DNA and lack of dealer support doomed it from the start. Number 3. Ford TW30, 1979 to 1983. Ford's TW series tractors, launched in the late 1970s, were intended to be the Blue brand's answer to John Deere's dominance in the row crop and high horsepower segments. The TW30, introduced in 1979, was the flagship, boasting around 170 horsepower from a turbocharged Ford 6-cylinder diesel. It was marketed as a powerful yet versatile tractor, capable of handling both tillage and heavy draft work. It featured dual power shift on the go, improved hydraulics, and optional 4WD, making it competitive on paper with Deere's 4640 and 4840 models. At first, the TW30 gained attention for its sleek styling and strong specs. Farmers appreciated its raw power and found it well suited for heavy work. However, Ford's Achilles heel was reliability and dealer support compared to John Deere. Transmission and rear-end failures were reported, particularly under sustained heavy loads. Hydraulic performance also lagged behind Deere's highly refined systems. Another factor was perception. Many farmers saw Ford as better at making trucks and cars than tractors, whereas John Deere carried an ironclad reputation in farming machinery. Even though the TW30 sold reasonably well, it didn't sway Deere loyalists or capture the market share Ford had hoped for. By the early 1980s, Deere continued to dominate, and Ford's tractors became known more for being solid secondary options rather than industry leaders. The TW30 ultimately highlighted how hard it was for even a global giant like Ford to knock John Deere off its pedestal in the US tractor market. Number 4. Massey Ferguson 1800 and 2800 Series, 1970s. In the 1970s, Massey Ferguson was still one of the biggest tractor brands in the world, with strong sales in North America and Europe. To challenge John Deere in the rapidly growing high-horsepower 4WD market, they introduced the 1800 and 2800 series articulated tractors. Built in collaboration with Steiger, these were essentially rebadged Steiger models fitted with big Cummins diesel engines ranging from 200 to over 300 horsepower. On paper, they seemed like a direct challenge to Deere's powerful 7020 and 7520 tractors. The MF 1800 and 2800 were marketed as the ultimate solution for large-scale American farmers looking for massive pulling power. The tractors had excellent engines, heavy-duty frames, and impressive hydraulic capacity. But while Deere had carefully integrated its 4WD tractors into its own design philosophy, Massey's models felt like outsiders wearing MF badges. Farmers could see that these machines weren't truly designed by Massey, but rather borrowed from Steiger with minor branding changes. This lack of originality hurt Massey's credibility. Worse still, the tractors suffered from reliability issues, particularly with transmissions and drive components that struggled under heavy loads. Farmers who expected Massey's legendary reliability were often disappointed. Dealer support also proved inconsistent compared to Deere's massive network, which had strong training and parts availability. Many MF dealers weren't prepared to handle the complexities of these big articulated machines. The tractors sold in some numbers, but they never reached the popularity Deere achieved. By the 1980s, Massey Ferguson was in deep financial trouble, and the 1800 and 2800 series quietly disappeared. In hindsight, they were bold attempts to compete, but they highlighted how difficult it was to match John Deere's engineering, marketing, and dealer support all at once. The Massey Ferguson 1800 and 2800 remain curiosities in tractor history, machines that had the horsepower to compete, but not the execution or loyalty to truly replace Deere. Number 5. Oliver 2255, 1972–1976. By the early 1970s, Oliver was under pressure to keep up with John Deere's dominance in the high-horsepower row-crop tractor market. Their answer was the Oliver 2255, introduced in 1972. It was the most powerful Oliver ever built, boasting a Cat 3208 V8 diesel engine producing up to 145 horsepower. On paper, it was a bold move. Instead of a six-cylinder like Deere's 4430 or 4630, Oliver went with a V8, hoping the extra muscle would give them an edge. The 2255 certainly looked the part. It was big, rugged, and marketed as Oliver's flagship, capable of pulling the largest implements and handling the growing demand for high-powered farming. Farmers were intrigued by the idea of a V8 tractor, something few brands had experimented with at the time. The Cat engine was reliable in trucks and industrial equipment, so confidence was high. Unfortunately, the 2255's downfall came quickly. The V8 design didn't translate well to farm use. While the engine produced horsepower, it lacked the low-end torque that farmers needed for heavy pulling. Fuel consumption was also extremely high compared to Deere's more efficient six-cylinder diesels, which was a major drawback during the energy-conscious 1970s. Reliability issues emerged as well, with drivetrain failures reported when the tractor was pushed hard. John Deere's competing models, particularly the 4630 and later the 4640, delivered comparable horsepower with better torque curves, fuel efficiency, and overall durability. Deere also had the dealer support and resale value that Oliver couldn't match. The 2255 quickly gained a reputation as an interesting experiment, but not a serious long-term contender. By 1976, Oliver was already being absorbed into white farm equipment, and the 2255 faded away. Collectors today remember it fondly as the cat-powered Oliver, but in reality, it was a desperate attempt to compete with Deere that failed due to poor market timing, inefficient design, and a mismatch between specs and farmer needs. Number 6. White Field Boss 2180, 1975 to 1982. After the Oliver brand was folded into White Farm Equipment, the company introduced a new flagship tractor line in the mid-1970s, the White Field Boss series. The 2180, launched in 1975, was aimed squarely at competing with John Deere's popular 4630 and 4640 row crop tractors. With a 180 horsepower turbocharged 6-cylinder diesel, the 2180 was powerful, stylish, and marketed as a modern alternative to Deere. The tractor had several strengths. Its styling, with white-gray paint and angular lines, gave it a sleek, modern look compared to Deere's more traditional green. The cab was comfortable for its time, with better visibility and quieter operation than many competitors. Farmers appreciated the raw horsepower, and on paper the 2180 stacked up well against Deere's offerings. But in practice, the tractor struggled. The cabs were prone to rattles and leaks, electrical systems were troublesome, and hydraulic performance often lagged behind Deere's refined and reliable setups. Worse, White's financial instability during this period meant dealers lacked confidence in long-term support. Many farmers worried that buying a White tractor would leave them stranded for parts and service, and unfortunately those fears often proved correct. John Deere's competitive advantage wasn't just its machines, it was the entire ownership experience, reliability, dealer support, and resale value. The 2180 could match Deere in horsepower, but it couldn't match Deere's trust factor. Farmers continued buying Deere, leaving White's ambitious Field Boss series as a secondary option. By the early 1980s, White was in serious decline, and the 2180 was discontinued. Today, it remains an interesting footnote in tractor history, a stylish, powerful machine that simply couldn't overcome Deere's dominance or White's financial struggles. It tried to replace John Deere in the American farmer's heart, but instead became a symbol of a company fighting for survival. Number 7. Steiger Series III's. Among all the competitors that tried to take on John Deere during the 1970s and early 1980s, perhaps none came closer to genuinely challenging the green giant than Steiger. Unlike many companies that relied on rebadged tractors or flashy gimmicks, Steiger had built its reputation the hard way, through raw pulling power, durability, and machines purpose-built for the growing demands of large-scale farming. By the time the Steiger Series III rolled out in 1976, the company had already established itself as the go-to brand for serious 4WD horsepower, and these new models pushed that reputation even further. The Series III lineup included tractors with names like Bearcat, Cougar, Panther, and Tiger, fittingly aggressive titles for machines that delivered between 220 and over 400 horsepower. These weren't gimmicks, they were true powerhouses. Farmers could spec them with massive Cummins, Caterpillar, or Detroit diesel engines, paired with Fuller or twin-disc transmissions, giving them unmatched pulling power for their era. On the open fields of the Midwest and Canadian prairies, these tractors could drag the biggest tillage tools and air seeders without breaking a sweat, while Deere's own 720 and 7520 sometimes looked undersized in comparison. What really set Steiger apart was its straightforward design philosophy. Built in Fargo, North Dakota, the tractors were known for being rugged, easy to work on, and surprisingly farmer-friendly despite their size. The cabs were roomy and offered good visibility, and while Deere often marketed refinement and reliability, Steiger won fans simply by doing the job better in certain conditions. On raw strength alone, many farmers believed Steiger had finally created a machine that could knock Deere down a peg. But while the tractors themselves were competitive, arguably superior in some respects, the company couldn't match Deere's biggest advantage, its dealer network and support system. Deere dealers blanketed rural America, ensuring that a breakdown could often be repaired within hours. Steiger, by contrast, had far fewer dealers and limited parts availability. If something major failed on a Steiger, downtime could stretch into days, costing farmers valuable planting or harvest time. Even loyal Steiger owners admitted this was the brand's Achilles heel. Despite solid sales and a loyal following, Steiger never managed to break Deere's dominance. By the early 1980s, financial troubles caught up with the company, and in 1986 it was acquired by Case IH. Today, the Series III tractors are remembered as true beasts of their time. Machines that could easily outmuscle Deere in the field, but that couldn't overcome the Green Giant's empire of marketing, loyalty, and service support. Number 8. Allis-Chalmers 220, 1969 to 1973. Although technically introduced in the late 1960s, the Allis-Chalmers 220 was marketed heavily in the early 1970s as a competitor to John Deere's growing line of high-horsepower tractors. With 145 PTO horsepower from a turbocharged 6-cylinder diesel, the 220 was positioned as Allis's flagship row crop tractor, capable of tackling the big jobs on expanding American farms. The 220 had some impressive features. It was built tough, with a heavy chassis and strong hydraulics. The styling was modern for the time, and the cab, while not luxurious, offered decent comfort compared to older Allis models. The power from its turbocharged engine was competitive with Deere's 4520 and 4620, and Allis hoped the 220 would help them gain traction in the large tractor market. However, the tractor ran into several problems. Fuel consumption was high, especially compared to Deere's more efficient engines, which were gaining attention during the fuel-conscious 1970s. The 220 also had issues with reliability, particularly in the transmission and final drives when pushed hard in heavy tillage work. Many farmers who wanted a dependable workhorse found Deere's offerings more consistent and better supported by dealers. Dealer networks also worked against Allis-Chalmers. Deere had built a reputation for unmatched dealer service and parts availability, while Allis dealers were fewer and less consistent across the Midwest. This meant that when breakdowns happened, Deere owners were back in the field faster than Allis owners. By 1973, the 220 was discontinued after relatively low sales. Deere's 4630 and 4640 would soon dominate the market segment. Allis had tried to enter. The 220 is remembered today as a bold tractor with big ambitions, but it lacked the refinement, efficiency, and support system that Deere brought to the table. It tried to challenge Deere's row crop dominance but became more of a stepping stone in Allis-Chalmers' eventual decline. Number 9. Case 1070, 1970 to 1978. The Case 1070, launched in 1970, was Case's attempt to claw back market share in the competitive 100 to 150 horsepower range, where John Deere's 4020 and later 4230/4430 dominated. With 451 cubic inches and around 108 PTO horsepower, the 1070 was positioned as a modern, versatile row crop tractor that could handle everything from tillage to haymaking. The 1070 had its strengths. Its styling, with squared-off fenders and a modern cab, gave it a sleek appearance. Case marketed it heavily as a strong, efficient alternative to Deere. The power shift transmission was a key selling point, offering smooth shifting that many farmers initially liked. On paper, it looked like a tractor that could finally give Deere a real fight in the mid-range segment. But in practice, the 1070 had serious weaknesses. The power shift transmission, while innovative, developed a reputation for failure under heavy use. Repairs were costly and time-consuming, souring many farmers on the machine. The engine, while powerful enough, was less fuel-efficient than Deere's diesels, an increasingly important factor during the 1970s energy crisis. Dealer networks again played a crucial role. Deere's dominance in parts availability and service made ownership far easier. Case dealers were fewer, and the company was already struggling financially by the mid-1970s. Farmers didn't want to risk buying a tractor that might be difficult to keep running. The 1070 sold in modest numbers, but it never matched Deere's success. In fact, its reliability problems hurt Case's reputation even further, pushing more farmers toward Deere. By the late 1970s, Case was forced into a merger with International Harvester, leading to the creation of Case IH. The 1070 stands today as a symbol of Case's struggles, an ambitious tractor that could have been a contender but instead became another failed challenger to John Deere's dominance. Number 10. Deutz DX160, 1975 to 1982. While Deere dominated the American market, European manufacturers also tried to gain a foothold. One of the most notable attempts came from Deutz, a German company with a strong reputation for air-cooled engines. In 1975, they introduced the DX160, a six-cylinder tractor with around 160 horsepower, designed to compete with Deere's 4640 and similar models. The DX160 looked striking, with its bright green paint and boxy European styling. It featured an air-cooled diesel engine, something quite different from the water-cooled engines favored in the US. The idea was that air cooling meant fewer maintenance issues, no radiator failures, and better reliability in harsh conditions. The tractor also had a comfortable cab, advanced hydraulics, and solid pulling power. But American farmers were skeptical. The air-cooled engine ran hot under heavy loads, especially in dusty Midwestern summers, leading to overheating problems. Parts availability was another issue. Deutz's dealer network in the US was tiny compared to Deere's, and many farmers simply didn't trust that they could get service quickly. Resale value was poor, since used buyers preferred Deere or IH. Deere's competing tractors not only matched the DX160 in power, but also offered proven cooling systems, better dealer support, and higher reliability. Farmers who experimented with DITs often went back to Deere after frustrating breakdowns or service delays. The DX160 was eventually discontinued, and while Deutz remained popular in Europe, their attempt to crack the American row crop market failed. Today, the DX160 is remembered as an ambitious outsider, a tractor that had the specs to compete but couldn't overcome the cultural and practical dominance of John Deere in the US market. So there you have it. 10 tractors that thought they could knock John Deere off the throne but couldn't survive the fight. From bold experiments like IH's 2+2 to forgotten powerhouses from Allis-Chalmers, Case, and even Deutz, each one shows just how hard it was to beat not just Deere's machines, but the trust, loyalty, and dealer network behind them. Which of these failed challengers do you think had the best shot at actually replacing Deere? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you enjoyed this dive into tractor history, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another story from the world of farming's forgotten legends. Until next time, keep it green and keep it rolling.